I should have known better than to trust a listing with no photographs. The realtor's email was sparse, just an address, a price that seemed too good for the square footage, and a single line: Victorian on private hill, some restoration needed. When I called, her voice carried an odd hesitation, as if she were reading from a script she'd rather not recite. The previous owner was particular about showings, she said, but the estate is motivated to sell. I drove up there on a Tuesday afternoon in October, following a narrow road that curved through stands of birch and maple. The trees grew thicker as I climbed, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight into something resembling twilight. GPS lost signal about halfway up, but there was only one road, so I continued. The house revealed itself gradually, like a photograph developing in reverse. First the roofline, dark against the sky. Then the upper windows, their glass so clean they seemed to reflect nothing at all. Finally, the full structure, a 3-story Victorian painted in dove gray, with white trim that looked freshly applied despite the realtor's mention of needed restoration. It sat alone on the hill's crown, surrounded by a lawn that had been maintained with mathematical precision. Not a single leaf marred the grass, though the surrounding trees were deep in autumn shed. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, no wind through the branches. Just the sound of my car door closing, which seemed to echo longer than it should have. The front door was painted red, not burgundy or crimson, but the specific red of arterial blood. The brass knocker was shaped like a closed eye. I knocked anyways. The door opened before my hand had finished falling. The realtor stood there, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mr. Morrison, I'm Janet Clearwater. You're right on time." I hadn't given her a specific time. The interior was immaculate. Hardwood floors gleamed under pendant lights that cast no shadows. The walls were painted in shades of cream and pale yellow, colors that should have felt warm but somehow didn't. Every surface was clean, every corner dust-free, as if the house had been sealed away from the passage of time. "The previous owner maintained it beautifully," Janet said, leading me through rooms that flowed into each other with architectural logic. "He was very dedicated to the house." She spoke of him in past tense, but when I asked what had happened, she changed the subject to the kitchen's original cabinetry. We moved through the ground floor systematically. Living room, dining room, kitchen, study. Each space was furnished with pieces that looked expensive but felt wrong somehow. Chairs that seemed designed for bodies with different proportions. Tables that were either too high or too low. Mirrors that reflected the room but made it look slightly different than it actually was. "How long has it been empty?" I asked. "It's not empty," she said, then caught herself. "I mean, it wasn't empty until recently." In the study, I noticed something odd about the bookshelves. They were filled with books, but every spine was blank. Hundreds of volumes, all bound in identical black leather, all unmarked. When I reached for one, Janet's hand shot out to stop me. "The books are part of the estate," she said. "They stay with the house." Her grip was cold and stronger than it should have been. The staircase to the second floor was carpeted in deep burgundy. Our footsteps made no sound as we climbed, though I could feel the boards flexing beneath our weight. The banister was polished to a mirror shine, and as I ran my hand along it, I noticed my reflection looked delayed, as if the image was following my movement by a fraction of a second. The second floor held 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. Each room was furnished in clean beds made with hospital corners, curtains drawn to precise angles. But the windows bothered me. They were large, offering what should have been spectacular views of the valley below, but somehow they seemed to show less than they should. The landscape beyond looked flattened, like a photograph rather than a living vista. "The master bedroom," Janet said, opening the door to the largest room. The bed was enormous, carved from dark wood that seemed to absorb light. The posts were topped with finials shaped like, well, I couldn't quite tell what they were shaped like. My eyes kept sliding away from them, as if they were designed to discourage close examination. "What happened to the previous owner?" I asked again. Janet was quiet for a long moment, staring at the bed. He became very attached to the house, couldn't bear to leave it, even for necessities. Toward the end, he had everything delivered. Groceries, supplies, everything. He hadn't left the property in quite some time. And now he's gone. She wouldn't elaborate. The third floor was accessed by a narrower staircase, this one uncarpeted. Our footsteps echoed strangely, as if the sound was bouncing off surfaces that weren't there. The ceiling was lower here, the hallway dimmer despite the overhead lights. "Just storage and a small office," Janet said, but she seemed reluctant to lead me up. The office was at the front of the house, its windows facing down the hill toward the road. The desk was clear except for a single item, a leather-bound journal, closed and secured with a ribbon. "What's that?" "Property records," Janet said quickly. "Very boring stuff." But I could see writing through the leather cover, as if the words were pressed deep enough to show through the binding. The text seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. I moved to the window and looked down at my car. From this angle, I could see the entire road I'd driven up, winding through the trees. But something was wrong with the perspective. The road seemed to go on much longer than it should have, curving back on itself in ways that defied the geography I'd just navigated. "The view is interesting," I said. Janet joined me at the window. The previous owner spent a lot of time up here, watching. "Watching what?" "The road. He liked to know when people were coming." I looked down again. My car was still there, but now it seemed smaller, more distant, as if the hill had grown while we were inside. "I think I've seen enough," I said. But when we turned to leave, the journal was open. Neither of us had touched it. The ribbon lay beside it, undisturbed, but the pages were spread wide, revealing handwriting in dark ink. The words were in English, but they seemed to rearrange themselves as I read, forming sentences that made sense for just a moment before dissolving into something else. Janet closed the journal quickly, her hands shaking slightly. "We should go," she said. The descent felt longer than the climb. The stairs seemed to multiply beneath our feet, each landing familiar but somehow different from the one we'd passed on the way up. The burgundy carpet felt thicker, more yielding, as if we were walking on something alive. On the second floor, I noticed that the bedroom doors were now closed, all of them. I was certain we'd left them open. "Did you?" I began. The house settles, Janet said. Changes in temperature, very common in older homes. But the air felt exactly the same temperature as when we'd arrived. The ground floor seemed darker now, though the electric lights were still on. The shadows fell differently, creating corners where none should exist. In the living room, I could have sworn the furniture had been rearranged, shifted just enough to change the flow of the space. Janet walked quickly toward the front door, her heels clicking on the hardwood in a rhythm that seemed to echo from multiple directions. I followed, eager to leave, but something made me glance back at the staircase. A figure stood at the top of the stairs, tall, thin, wearing a dark suit that seemed to be cut from shadow rather than fabric. Its face was pale, almost luminous in the dim light, and it was looking directly at me. I blinked and it was gone. Did you say? The house has been empty for months, Janet said without turning around. There's no one here but us. But I could feel eyes watching from the upper floors, following our movement toward the exit. The front door opened easily, almost eagerly, as if the house were anxious to release us. The afternoon light seemed blindingly bright after the interior dimness, and I had to squint as we stepped onto the porch. So, Janet said, her professional smile returning, what do you think? I looked back at the house. The windows were dark now, though I was certain the lights had been on when we left each room. The red door seemed to pulse gently, like a heartbeat. I need to think about it, I said. Of course, take your time, though I should mention, the estate is hoping for a quick sale. The right buyer, someone who can appreciate the house's unique character. I walked to my car, Janet following. The grass crunched under our feet, though it had been silent when we arrived. When I looked back, our footprints were clearly visible in the perfect lawn dark impressions that seemed to be growing rather than fading. One more question, I said, hand on the car door. What was the previous owner's name? Janet hesitated. Morrison, she said finally. James Morrison. The same last name as mine. A coincidence, surely, but it sent a chill down my spine. Any relation? She asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Not that I know of. I got in the car and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I watched Janet walk back toward the house, but she didn't go inside. Instead, she stood on the porch, watching me drive away, her figure growing smaller but somehow more distinct as the distance increased. The road down the hill felt different, longer. The curves seemed sharper, the trees closer to the pavement. My GPS never regained signal, but I followed the road as it wound through the forest, trusting it to lead me back to the main highway. 20 minutes later, I was still driving through trees. The fuel gauge showed 3/4 full, though I'd started with a half tank. The clock on the dashboard read 3:17 p.m., the same time it had shown when I'd first looked at it after leaving the house. I pulled over and called the realtor's number. It went straight to voicemail. You've reached Clearwater Realty. We're sorry, but this number is no longer in service. I tried again, thinking I'd misdialed. Same message. The road stretched ahead of me, disappearing into the trees. Behind me, it curved back toward the hill, though I couldn't see the house from here. I had two choices: continue forward into the unknown or turn around and go back. I chose forward. The trees began to thin after another 10 minutes, and finally, I saw the highway ahead. The relief was overwhelming. I pulled onto the main road and drove home, not stopping until I was in my own driveway. That night, I researched the property online. The address didn't exist in any database. The street name returned no results. Even the hill itself seemed to be absent from satellite imagery, just a blank space in the forest, as if the cameras had been unable to focus on that particular area. I called the number I'd originally dialed to inquire about the house. A cheerful receptionist answered, "Morrison Realty, how can I help you?" "I'm looking for information about a property on Sorrow Hill," I said. Long pause. "I'm sorry, we don't have any listings in that area." "I spoke with someone yesterday, Janet Clearwater." "There's no one by that name working here. Are you sure you have the right company?" I hung up and searched for Janet Clearwater online. No results. No realtor by that name in the entire state. 3 days later, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address, no postmark. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an address written in elegant script. The house on Sorrow Hill, 1847 Morning Lane. Below that, in the same handwriting, "Welcome home, James." I threw the letter away, but that night I dreamed of the house. The red door opening to reveal rooms I hadn't seen, corridors that stretched deeper into the hill than should have been possible. In the dream, I was walking through these spaces, and they felt familiar, as if I'd lived there before. I woke to find mud on my bedroom floor. Fresh mud, with the distinctive smell of the forest soil from the hill. The dreams continued, growing more vivid each night. I began to see details I hadn't noticed during the tour. The way the light fixtures cast shadows that moved independently of any breeze. The pattern in the wallpaper that seemed to spell out words in a language I almost understood. The sound of footsteps in the rooms above, always one floor higher than where I stood. A week later, I found myself driving toward the hill again. I hadn't planned to go there. I'd been heading to the grocery store, but somehow I'd taken the wrong turns, followed the wrong roads, and now I was climbing through the forest toward the house that supposedly didn't exist. This time, the door was already open. I sat in the car for a long time, engine running, debating whether to leave. But the house waited patiently, its windows dark, its red door a wound in the gray facade. And I realized with a certainty that terrified me that I had been here before, not in the recent past, but long ago. The memories were there, just beneath the surface, waiting to be acknowledged. I turned off the engine and got out. The silence was deeper now, complete. Even my footsteps made no sound as I walked toward the house. The door swung wider as I approached, revealing the immaculate interior I remembered. But this time, I could see the house as it really was. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, all showing the same man at different ages. A young man in a Victorian suit standing beside a newly built house. The same man older, tending to a garden that was now the perfect lawn. The same man ancient, sitting in the study surrounded by the blank books that weren't blank at all, but filled with his handwriting, his thoughts, his increasing desperation to understand what was happening to him. The same man whose face I recognized from mirrors. I walked through the rooms, and now I could see them as they truly were, not preserved but preserving. The house wasn't maintained despite its age. It was maintained because of its nature. It existed outside of time, a pocket of eternity carved into the hillside. In the study, the journal lay open on the desk. The handwriting was mine, though I had no memory of writing the words. The entries spanned decades, chronicling the slow realization of what I had become, what the house had made me. Day 1247. The visitors come less frequently now. I think the house is becoming more selective. Day 2891. Tried to leave today. The road leads back to itself. I am the hill, and the hill is me. Day 7352. A new one came today. Morrison, like me, like all of us. The house is calling its children home. I turned the pages, reading years of entries in handwriting that became increasingly frantic, then resigned, then peaceful. The final entry was dated yesterday. He will arrive soon. I have prepared everything. The house is ready for the next guardian. I can rest now. I looked up from the journal to find him standing in the doorway, the figure I'd glimpsed on the stairs during my first visit. But now I could see him clearly, and I understood why Janet had spoken of him in past tense. He was translucent, fading, his duty finally complete. "Welcome home, James," he said, his voice like wind through dry leaves. "I've been waiting such a long time." He smiled, and his face was my face, aged by centuries of solitude. "The house needs a guardian," he continued. "Someone to maintain it, to watch the road, to welcome the family when they come to visit. It's a good life, James, peaceful, and you'll never be alone. The house is full of us, all the Morrisons who came before." I wanted to run, to scream, to deny what I was seeing. But the house wrapped around me like a familiar embrace, and I felt the weight of belonging, of purpose, of home. "The visitors will come," he said, his form growing fainter. "Other family members, drawn by dreams they don't understand. You'll help them find their way as Janet helped you, as I helped Janet long ago." Oh, Janet was. Morrison, like us, like all of us. The house chooses its own name, its own face, but we are all the same family in the end. He was barely visible now, just a whisper of shadow in the doorway. "Take care of the house, James. It will take care of you." And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the study, with the journal and the growing understanding of what I had become. I sit here now, writing these words, adding my voice to the record that spans centuries. The house is quiet around me, but it's not empty. I can feel the others, all the previous guardians, all the Morrisons who came before, watching from the corners of rooms, standing in doorways, keeping me company in the endless twilight of this place. The road outside curves down through the forest, and I know that somewhere another Morrison is reading a real estate listing, drawn by a price that seems too good to be true. They'll drive up the hill, guided by something deeper than GPS, and I'll be waiting to welcome them home. The house on Sorrow Hill has stood for longer than records show, and it will stand long after the last tree falls in the forest below. It exists for us, and we exist for it, a family bound by something stronger than blood. I am the guardian now, and I am content. The door is red for a reason. It's the color of welcome, of warmth, of the heart that beats at the center of every home. And it's always open for family. I should have left them there. Even now, 3 weeks later, I can still feel the weight of that decision pressing against my chest like a cold stone. But you have to understand, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was helping. The house came to me after Aunt Millicent died. She'd been the family eccentric, the one who collected things that served no purpose other than to fill empty rooms. Victorian dolls with cracked porcelain faces, music boxes that played off-key melodies, and books in languages I couldn't identify. The lawyers said the house was mine now, along with everything in it. I'd planned to sell it quickly. The real estate market was good, and I needed the money. But first, I had to clear out her belongings. That's how I found myself standing in her narrow hallway on a Tuesday morning, holding a flashlight and staring up at the attic access panel I'd never noticed before. The ladder creaked under my weight. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight as I pushed through the opening, and that's when I saw them. Mirrors, dozens of them, arranged in a perfect circle around the attic floor. Some were tall and ornate, others small and simple. A few were so old their silver backing had begun to peel away in long, dark streaks. They all faced inward, toward the center of the circle, where a single wooden chair sat waiting. I remember thinking how strange it was that none of them reflected my light properly. The beams seemed to bend and scatter, creating shadows where there should have been illumination. But I was focused on the practicalities then. Mirrors were valuable. These looked antique. I could probably sell them for enough to cover the house's property taxes. Moving them down was harder than I'd expected. Each mirror seemed heavier than it should have been, and more than once I caught myself pausing on the ladder, certain I'd heard footsteps in the attic above me. But the house was old. Old houses make sounds. I arranged them in the living room temporarily, propping them against the walls while I researched their potential value. That's when I first noticed the problem with the reflections. It started small. I'd catch a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision and turn to find nothing there. Or I'd see my reflection in one mirror while walking past another, which shouldn't have been possible given the angles. I told myself it was the stress of handling the estate, the unfamiliarity of the house, the way afternoon light played tricks through dusty windows. But on the third night, I saw her. I was sitting in Millicent's old armchair, laptop open, researching antique mirror values, when I noticed the woman in the tall mirror across the room. She was standing behind my chair, perfectly still, wearing a dress that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her face was turned away from me, towards something I couldn't see. When I spun around, the chair behind me was empty. I approached the mirror slowly, my reflection joining me step by step, but the woman remained, standing in a space that should have been impossible. She was inside the mirror, existing in a room that looked like Millicent's living room but wasn't quite right. The wallpaper was the same pattern but different colors. The furniture was arranged in reverse. I reached out to touch the glass, and she turned. I don't want to describe her face. Even now, the memory of it makes my hands shake. It wasn't that she was hideous, quite the opposite. She was beautiful in a way that made my eyes water, as if beauty itself had been concentrated into something too pure for human perception. But her eyes were mirrors. Perfect, silver mirrors that reflected not my face, but something else entirely. I stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp, and when I looked again, she was gone. I should have left the next morning. I should have loaded the mirrors into a truck and driven them to the nearest antique dealer, or better yet, the dump. But I didn't. I couldn't, because I'd seen something in those mirror eyes that I recognized. Millicent, not as she'd been when she died, old and brittle and confused, but as she'd been in the family photographs from 50 years ago. Young and vital, with that same enigmatic smile she'd worn in every picture. I started spending more time in front of the mirrors. I told myself I was studying them, trying to understand their construction, their age, their value. But really, I was waiting for her to appear again. She did, of course, never in the same mirror twice. Sometimes she was closer, sometimes farther away. Sometimes she was joined by others, figures I couldn't quite make out, shadows that moved with purpose through that reversed room. And always, she was trying to tell me something. Her lips moved constantly, forming words I couldn't hear through the glass. Her hands gestured frantically, pointing to things in her mirror world that didn't exist in mine. Once, I saw her press her palms against the glass from the inside, her mouth open in what might have been a scream or a warning. I began to understand that the mirrors weren't just reflective surfaces. They were windows, and the room they showed wasn't a reversed version of Millicent's living room. It was the same room, but from before, from when she was still alive. The realization came to me gradually, like a photograph developing in a dark room. Millicent had arranged these mirrors in a circle upstairs for a reason. She'd sat in that chair, surrounded by them, and somehow she'd stepped through, into the glass, into the time before time, where she could be young again, where she could exist in the spaces between reflections. But something had gone wrong. She was trapped, and she needed my help to get out. I spent 3 days figuring out how to arrange the mirrors back in their original circle. The pattern was crucial. Each mirror had to be positioned at exactly the right angle to create the proper convergence. By the 4th day, I had them back in the attic, facing inward toward that wooden chair. The moment I completed the circle, the temperature in the attic dropped 20 degrees. My breath came out in visible puffs, and every mirror began to fog over simultaneously. Then the fog cleared, and I could see them all. Not just Millicent, dozens of figures moving through the mirror world, their faces pressed against the glass. Some were old, some young. Some wore clothes from decades past, others from centuries. All of them were trying to speak, their mouths moving urgently, their hands reaching toward me through the impossible barrier. I understood then what Millicent had been trying to tell me. The mirrors weren't just windows to the past. They were prisons. And every person who'd ever sat in that chair, who'd ever tried to step through into the glass, had become trapped in the spaces between reflections. But I also understood something else. The circle was incomplete. It needed someone sitting in the center to work properly. Someone to serve as an anchor, a bridge between the world of glass and the world of flesh. I could free them, all of them. I just had to sit in the chair. The wood was cold against my back as I settled into place. Around me, the mirrors began to hum, a low, resonant sound that seemed to come from the glass itself. The figures in the reflections grew more agitated, their movements more frantic. Millicent appeared in the mirror directly in front of me, her young face streaked with tears that looked like liquid silver. She was shaking her head violently, her hands pressed against the glass. Her mouth formed a single word, over and over. No, no, no. But it was too late. I could already feel the pull of the mirrors. The the way they tugged at something essential inside me. The reflection of the attic around me began to shimmer and shift, taking on the quality of water disturbed by a stone. The figures in the glass were no longer pressing against the barriers. They were backing away, their faces filled with what I now recognized as terror. Because they hadn't been trying to escape, they'd been trying to warn me. The mirrors don't show the past, they show the future. Every possible future, every potential outcome, every path that time might take. And the people trapped inside aren't prisoners, they're guards. Sentinels standing watch over the infinite possibilities, making sure that certain futures never come to pass. I realize this now as I sit in this chair that has become my throne and my jail. I can see through all the mirrors at once, witnessing the branching paths of time, the terrible beauty of everything that could be. I watch over the futures where cities burn, where oceans boil, where the sky tears open like paper. I hold them back with my will, with my presence, with the weight of my existence pressed against the glass. Millicent is here with me now, along with all the others. We take turns in the chair, sharing the burden of keeping the worst possibilities at bay. She tells me she's been here for 30 years, though time moves differently in the mirror world. The man before her had been here for 60, the woman before him for a century. We are the reason the world continues to exist in its current form. We are the guardians of causality, the shepherds of consequence, and we can never leave. Sometimes, late at night, I see movement in the house below. New owners have moved in, drawn by the affordable price and the charming Victorian architecture. They've found the mirrors I left in the living room. I made sure to leave just enough to intrigue them, to make them curious about what else might be hidden in the house. Soon, one of them will find their way up here. They'll see the empty chair, the circle of mirrors, and they'll think they understand. They'll believe they can help us, just as I believed I could help Millicent. And maybe they can. Maybe they'll be the one who sits in the chair and discovers they're strong enough to hold back the dark futures permanently, to free the rest of us from our vigil. Or maybe they'll simply become another guardian, another sentinel in the endless watch. Either way, I'll be waiting. We all will, because someone has to sit in the chair, someone has to watch the mirrors, someone has to make sure that the worst of all possible worlds never comes to pass. The mirrors are patient. They have all the time in the world. And now, so do I. I've been putting off writing this down for 3 months now. Every time I sit at my laptop, my hands start shaking before I can get past the first sentence. But Dr. Reeves says it might help, and honestly, I'm running out of options. The nightmares haven't stopped. Neither has the sound. I should probably start with why I took the apartment in the first place. Money, mostly. After the divorce, I was looking for something cheap in the city, and cheap usually means there's something wrong with it. The listing for 4B at 1847 Maple Street was almost too good to be true, a one-bedroom in Brooklyn Heights for $800 a month. In this market, that's like finding a $20 bill in a library book. The building super, Mr. Kowalski, met me at the front door. He was maybe 70, with those thick-rimmed glasses that make your eyes look enormous and fingers that were permanently stained yellow from cigarettes. When I asked about the rent, he just shrugged and said the owner was motivated to fill it quickly. Previous tenant left in a hurry, he explained, jingling his keys as we climbed the narrow staircase. Left most of his stuff behind. We had to clear it out ourselves. The apartment was on the fourth floor, at the end of a hallway that seemed to stretch longer than it should have. The walls were that institutional green you see in old hospitals, and the fluorescent lights hummed with a frequency that made my teeth ache. Mr. Kowalski fumbled with the lock for what felt like 5 minutes before the door finally opened. The apartment itself was decent enough. Hardwood floors, high ceilings, a kitchen that had been updated sometime in the last decade. But there was something about the air inside. It felt thick, like breathing through wet cotton, and cold. Even though it was September and warm outside, I could see my breath in little puffs. "Heating's a bit quirky," Mr. Kowalski said, though he didn't seem to notice the temperature. Previous tenant complained about it too. I asked what happened to the previous tenant, and his expression changed. Just for a second, but I caught it. A tightening around his eyes, like he was trying to remember something he'd rather forget. "Health issues," he said finally. "Had to move out quick for health issues." I should have asked more questions. Should have wondered why someone would leave furniture behind, why the rent was so low, why Mr. Kowalski wouldn't quite meet my eyes when he talked about the previous tenant. But I was desperate, and desperate people don't ask the right questions. I signed the lease that afternoon. The first few weeks were normal. I moved in my meager belongings, set up my home office in the living room, started freelancing again. The apartment was quiet during the day, which I liked. The only sounds were the usual city noises filtering through the windows, traffic, sirens, the occasional argument from the street below. But at night, things were different. It started with the footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate pacing back and forth across what I assumed was the apartment directly overhead. The building was old, so some noise was expected, but these footsteps had a quality that bothered me. They were too regular, too measured, like someone walking the same path over and over, never deviating, never stopping. I asked Mr. Kowalski about it when I ran into him in the lobby. "Fifth floor's been empty for 2 years," he said, not looking up from his newspaper. "Landlord's been trying to renovate, but keeps running into permit issues." I told him about the footsteps, and he finally looked at me. That same expression from when I'd asked about the previous tenant. "Old buildings make noise," he said. "Pipes, settling, all kinds of things. You'll get used to it." But I didn't get used to it. If anything, it got worse. The footsteps became more frequent, more insistent. They'd start around midnight and continue until dawn, sometimes so loud I was sure the ceiling was going to collapse. I started wearing earplugs, but somehow I could still hear them. Not through my ears, but through the walls, through the floor, through my bones. Then I found the notebook. I was looking for my phone charger, which had somehow ended up wedged between the radiator and the wall in the bedroom. As I was fishing it out, my fingers brushed against something else, a small, spiral-bound notebook that must have been left behind by the previous tenant. Most of the pages were blank, but the first few were filled with handwriting. Neat, careful script that became increasingly erratic as it progressed. The first entry was dated 6 months earlier. "Day 1 moved in today. Apartment is perfect. Finally found a place where I can have some peace and quiet. Day 3, footsteps upstairs. Landlord says it's empty, but someone's definitely walking around up there. We'll ask Super about it tomorrow. Day 7, Super says no one's been in 5B for years. Footsteps getting louder. Can't sleep. Day 12, tried going upstairs to check myself. Door to 5B is locked, but I can hear the footsteps through it. Sounds like they're right on the other side. Day 18, footsteps have changed. They're not just pacing anymore. They stop sometimes, right above my bed. I can feel them standing there, waiting. Day 23, I think they're trying to communicate. The pattern has changed. 3 steps forward, 2 back, pause. 3 steps forward, 2 back, pause, over and over. Day 31, I understand now. They're not random. They're spelling something. THELAST, the last what? The entries stopped there, but the handwriting in that final entry was barely legible, like it had been written by someone whose hands were shaking uncontrollably. I should have packed up and left right then, should have broken the lease, forfeited the deposit, moved back in with my sister until I could find something else. But I didn't. I told myself it was just the previous tenant's paranoia, that he'd had some kind of breakdown and was hearing things that weren't there. But that night, I listened more carefully to the footsteps. 3 steps forward, 2 back, pause. 3 steps forward, 2 back, pause. THELAST, the last. I started my own notebook that night. Day 1 found previous tenant's journal. He was tracking the footsteps too. Same pattern I've been hearing. Day 4 tried to research the building's history. Most records are missing or incomplete. Building was constructed in 1923, but there's a gap in the documentation between 1943 and 1951. Day 8, footsteps are getting more complex. Still the same basic pattern, but now there are additional sequences. I think they're trying to spell out more words. Day 15, the last tenant. That's what they're spelling, over and over. The last tenant. Day 22, I understand now what the previous tenant went through. The footsteps aren't just noise. They're a message, a warning, but warning about what? Day 28, I went to the city records office today. Found some old newspaper clippings about the building. In 1944, there was a fire on the 5th floor. 3 people died. The article mentioned that the victims were the last tenants to evacuate, but they never made it out. Day 35, the footsteps have stopped spelling words. Now they're just waiting. I can feel them up there, standing still, listening, waiting for something. Day 42, I think I'm supposed to be the last tenant, the last one to live here before. Before what? What happens to the last tenant? That was my final entry. I couldn't bring myself to write anything after that, because I'd started to understand what the previous tenant had understood, what all the previous tenants had understood, probably. The building wasn't just old, it was hungry. I started researching in earnest, spending hours at the library, digging through old records and newspaper archives. The pattern was there once you knew how to look for it. Every few years, someone would rent apartment 4B. They'd stay for a few months, then leave suddenly, always citing health issues or family emergencies, always leaving their belongings behind. But they weren't leavings. I found the first mention in a 1951 police report, a missing person case that was never solved, then another in 1956, then 1963. The intervals weren't regular, but they were consistent. Someone would rent 4B, live there for a few months, then disappear. The landlord would clean out the apartment and rent it again. The last entry in the police files was from 1987. After that, nothing. No missing person reports, no investigations. Like the police had stopped caring or stopped noticing. But the tenant turnover continued. I found rental records going back decades. The same pattern over and over. Short-term leases, abrupt departures, belongings left behind. The landlord had been cycling through tenants for 70 years, and somehow no one had ever asked why. The footsteps changed again on my 45th night in the apartment. Instead of the measured pacing, they became frantic, desperate, like someone running back and forth, searching for something they couldn't find. And underneath the footsteps, I started hearing something else. It was scratching. It was coming from inside the walls, a sound like fingernails dragging across wood. Slow at first, then faster, more urgent. The scratching would start at the same time as the footsteps, and it would follow the same path across the ceiling. I started sleeping in the living room, as far from the bedroom as possible, but it didn't help. The scratching followed me. It was in all the walls now, surrounding me, a constant skittering that made my skin crawl. On the 50th night, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a flashlight and went upstairs to the 5th floor. The hallway was darker than it should have been, like the shadows were thicker there. The air smelled wrong too, not musty or stale, but sweet. Sickly sweet, like flowers left too long in water. Apartment 5B was at the end of the hall, just like mine. The door was older than the others, painted a deep red that looked black in the dim light. I pressed my ear against it and listened. Silence. But not the kind of silence you hear in an empty room. This was the silence of something holding its breath. I tried the handle, locked just like the previous tenant had said, but as I was turning away, I heard it. A single, soft knock from the other side of the door. Then another. Then 3 in rapid succession. I ran back to my apartment and spent the rest of the night huddled in the bathtub with every light in the place turned on. But even with the lights, I could feel them up there, waiting, watching, getting ready. The next morning, I called Mr. Kowalski and told him I was moving out. He didn't seem surprised. Health issues, he asked. Something like that. I'll need you to clean out your belongings by the end of the week. New tenants moving in on Monday. I wanted to warn him about the new tenant, wanted to tell him what was going to happen. But what would I say? That the building was haunted, that something in apartment 5B was collecting tenants like specimens, that whoever moved into 4B was eventually going to disappear just like all the others. He'd think I was crazy, just like the previous tenant probably seemed crazy when he tried to warn people. I packed my things that afternoon. As I was loading boxes into my car, I saw him, a young guy, maybe 25, carrying a single suitcase up the front steps. He looked excited, probably thinking he'd found a great deal on a nice apartment. I almost said something, almost walked over and told him to turn around, get back in his car, and never come back. But I didn't. Instead, I got in my car and drove away. That was 3 months ago. I've been living in a studio apartment in Queens, paying twice what I was paying for 4B. It's cramped and noisy and the heat barely works, but I can sleep at night, mostly. Sometimes I still hear the footsteps. They're fainter now, like they're coming from very far away, but they're still there. 3 steps forward, 2 back, pause, the last tenant. And sometimes, when the city gets quiet enough, I can hear the scratching too. Dr. Reeves says it's PTSD, that I'm having auditory hallucinations brought on by stress and sleep deprivation. She's prescribed medication and therapy and says I should start feeling better soon. But I know what I heard. I know what's in that building. And I know that right now, somewhere in apartment 4B, there's a young man who's probably just starting to notice the footsteps overhead. He's probably asking Mr. Kowalski about them, getting the same answers I got. He's probably telling himself it's just an old building making noise. In a few weeks, he'll find my notebook. I left it behind, wedged between the radiator and the wall, just like the previous tenant left his, and just like the tenant before him and the one before him. Because that's what you do when you're the last tenant. You leave a record for the next one, a warning that they won't heed, just like you didn't heed the warning left for you. The cycle continues. And somewhere in Brooklyn Heights, in a building that's been hungry for 70 years, the footsteps are pacing overhead. 3 steps forward, 2 back, pause. The last tenant. Always the last tenant. Until the next one moves in.